Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful for You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air in the Forrester Creations boardroom, usually redolent of expensive perfume and unshakable confidence, was thick enough to be cut with a steak knife. Eric, frail but resolute in his tailored suit, leaned heavily on the polished mahogany table. Ridge, his brow a roadmap of perpetual frustration, stood opposite him, the usual father-son dynamic replaced by a cold corporate standoff. Brooke, ever the mediator, looked on with wide, anxious eyes, her loyalties between her husband and the empire she'd helped build. "This is a farce, father," Ridge's voice was a low growl, echoing in the tense silence. "A secret shareholder? After all these years? It doesn't make any sense." Before Eric could respond, the massive oak doors swung open. All heads turned. There, silhouetted against the gleaming hallway, stood Daphne, the sweet-natured intern who had charmed her way into the family's heart. But the woman who entered was not the timid girl they knew. Her posture was rigid, her chin held high, and in her hand, she clutched a single, cream-colored legal document. Her eyes, usually warm and welcoming, scanned the room with a chilling, unfamiliar resolve. "It makes perfect sense," Ridge, a new voice, smooth as silk and sharp as a scalpel, came from behind her. John Finnegan stepped into the room, not in his doctor's coat, but in an impeccably fitted designer suit. He placed a reassuring hand on the small of Daphne's back, a gesture of solidarity that sent a shockwave through the assembled family. Steffi, his wife, stared in utter disbelief, her world tilting on its axis. "Finn? What is this?" Steffi whispered, the words catching in her throat. Finn ignored her, his gaze fixed on Eric. "The board is now assembled. I believe you have an announcement, Mr. Forrester." Eric's aged hands trembled slightly as he took the document from Daphne. He cleared his throat, the sound like dry leaves in the quiet room. "It has recently come to my light, a truth kept from me, from all of us, for over 2 decades. He looked at Daphne, his eyes filled with a painful mix of regret and awe. "Daphne is not just a talented young woman with a bright future. She is my granddaughter." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Brooke's hand flew to her mouth. Ridge looked as if he'd been physically struck. "Her mother," Eric continued, his voice gaining strength, "was Angela Forrester." The name landed like a bomb. Angela, Eric's long-lost sister, who had fled the family decades ago after a bitter fallout, her name all but erased from Forrester history. Before she passed, Angela entrusted her daughter's safety to a closed adoption, with a stipulation in her will. Upon Daphne's 25th birthday, or upon her introduction to this family, her shares of Forrester Creations, the 15% Angela inherited, would be transferred to her. 15%. The number hung in the air, its implications staggering. It was a power block that could shatter the fragile equilibrium, a weapon that could tip the scales irrevocably in the corporate war between Ridge and Steffi. "And as for the mysterious shareholder who has been acquiring stock," Finn said, stepping forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "That would be the trust one helped administer. To protect Daphne's interests until the truth could be revealed." But as the family erupted into a cacophony of accusations and denials, all directed at the suddenly formidable figure of Daphne and her unlikely ally, Finn, a slow, deliberate clapping began from the doorway. Everyone froze. Carter Walton stood there, a folded copy of the Los Angeles Chronicle in his hand, a grim smile on his face. "A touching family reunion," he said, his voice dripping with irony. "But you've all missed the real headline." He tossed the newspaper onto the table. The bold print was unmistakable: "Sheila Carter acquires Forrester stake through offshore trust." The blood drained from Finn's face. His confident demeanor shattered, replaced by raw panic. "No, that's not possible. The trust was airtight." Daphne stared at him, her newfound strength wavering. "Finn? What is he talking about? You said you were protecting me." The true, horrifying chess game was now revealed. Finn, manipulated by his own twisted sense of connection to Sheila, had been a pawn. The shares he thought he was securing for Daphne were now, in part, controlled by the one woman who threatened to burn their entire world to the ground. The revelation of Daphne's parentage wasn't just a family secret, it was the key that had unlocked the door for a monster to walk right in. The Forresters weren't just shaken, their very foundation had been cracked, and from the shadows, Sheila Carter was poised to bring it all crashing down. The silence that followed Carter's pronouncement was more deafening than any explosion. It was a vacuum, sucking the breath from every person in the room. All eyes, wide with a fresh, more profound terror, swiveled from the damning newspaper headline to Finn. The doctor, the healer, the man who had been their rock, now looked like a ghost, his face a mask of dawning, catastrophic comprehension. "Daphne," Finn whispered, his voice cracking as he reached for her. She recoiled as if his touch were acid, stumbling back into the solid form of Ridge, who instinctively steadied her, his own gaze a storm of betrayal and fury directed at his former son-in-law. "You," Ridge snarled, the single word laden with a lifetime of contempt. "You did this? You opened the gates and let that viper into our house? It wasn't supposed to be this way." Finn's plea was desperate, his eyes darting between a horrified Steffi and a stone-faced Eric. The trust was a shell company, Panamanian, completely anonymous. I was leveraging it to consolidate the shares for Daphne, to protect her from exactly this kind of corporate warfare. Sheila, she must have found a way in. She manipulated the lawyers, the transfers. I was trying to help. Help? Steffi finally found her voice, a broken, disbelieving thing. She took a step toward him, her pain so palpable it seemed to radiate heat. "You went behind my back, you conspired with my father's long-lost niece, and you funneled power to the woman who shot me and my mother? What part of that is help, Finn? What twisted, pathetic part of your psyche still answers when she calls?" Brooke moved to Steffi's side, her arm wrapping around her daughter's shoulders, her own heart breaking at the raw devastation on Steffi's face. "Oh, Steffi." The focus momentarily shifted from the shocking parentage to an immediate, existential threat. Daphne, the newly crowned princess of this chaos, stood trembling, her inheritance feeling less like a crown and more like a bomb vest. "My mother. Angela, she wanted to give me a legacy," she stammered, tears finally welling in her eyes. "Not a weapon. Not this." Eric, looking every one of his years and more, sank heavily into his chair at the head of the table. The revelation of a granddaughter, a piece of his beloved, estranged sister returned to him, was now utterly poisoned. 15%, he murmured, not with avarice, but with grief. Angela's share. And now, through this betrayal, it's tainted. Sheila Carter has her claws in my family's company, in my family. Carter, the reluctant harbinger of doom, remained by the door, his jaw tight. The article doesn't specify the percentage she controls. It could be 2%, it could be 10%. But it's a foothold. And with the internal power struggle between you and Ridge, and now with Daphne's new voting bloc, she doesn't need a majority. She just needs to be the thumb on the scale. The corporate and the personal had fused into a single, inescapable nightmare. Ridge's battle with Steffi for the CEO title was now a three-front war, with a wild-card heir and a psychotic shareholder in the mix. Steffi's marriage was lying in ruins at her feet, shattered by her husband's unforgivable alliance with the devil she knew best. And Finn, finally seeing the full, horrifying scope of his actions, could only stare at the wreckage. He had been so sure he was the smartest man in the room, playing a deep game to protect an innocent woman. Instead, he had been a puppet, and Sheila, watching from the shadows, had been pulling the strings all along, her laughter echoing in the silent, stunned aftermath of his ruin. The bold and the beautiful had been stripped away, leaving only the brutal and the broken. The war for Forrester Creations was no longer just a family affair. The battlefield had just expanded, and its most dangerous player had already taken the high ground. This response is AI-generated, for reference only. The stunned silence in the boardroom shattered as Steffi launched herself forward, not at Finn, but at Daphne. "You," she seethed, her voice a venomous whisper. "This was your plan all along, wasn't it? The wide-eyed in turn, so sweet, so grateful. You played us all to get to this moment. Daphne, shaking her head, tears now streaming down her face, took another step back. No. I didn't know, Steffi, I swear. I thought my parents died in a car accident. Finn came to me a month ago, he said he'd found discrepancies in my records, that he wanted to help me find my truth. Her eyes, pleading, found Finn's. You told me it was about justice. About family. And it was. Finn insisted, but the conviction was gone, replaced by a frantic, hollow defensiveness. I was trying to right a wrong. She must have been monitoring my movements, my financial inquiries. She used my efforts as a backdoor. Ridge let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. She used you, Finn. She always uses you. You're her favorite toy, and you never seem to learn how to stay in the box. He turned his attention to Daphne, his gaze analytical, stripping away her tears to see the shareholder beneath. But you hold the keys now. That 15%. What are you going to do with it? Before Daphne could form a word, a new voice, cool and commanding, cut through the tension. I believe that is the question of the hour. All heads turned to the doorway where Hope Logan stood, having witnessed the entire scene unfold. She wasn't looking at Ridge or Steffi, but directly at Daphne, her expression a complex mix of empathy and stark calculation. Hope, Brooke said, a note of warning in her tone. This is a private family matter. Is it? Hope asked, stepping fully into the room. It seems to me it's a company matter. A company where I am also a significant stakeholder. And where my line, Hope for the Future, is the primary competitor to Steffi's collections. She approached Daphne slowly, as one would a spooked animal. Daphne, I can't imagine how overwhelming this must be for you. To have your entire world turned upside down, only to be thrust into the middle of a battle you didn't ask for. Daphne looked at Hope, a flicker of relief crossing her features at seeing a face that wasn't contorted in rage or betrayal. It's a nightmare, she breathed. It doesn't have to be, Hope said softly, placing a gentle hand on her arm. You have power now. The power to choose your allies. The power to shape the future of this company. You don't have to be a pawn in someone else's game. Her eyes flickered meaningfully towards Finn, then towards a livid Steffi. You can be the queen. The implication was as clear as it was divisive. Hope was making her play. With Daphne's shares aligned with her own, she could potentially outmaneuver both Ridge and Steffi, securing control of Forrester Creations for her vision, her legacy. The simple family revelation had exploded into a multi-layered corporate coup. In one corner, a betrayed Steffi, her leadership and her marriage in ashes. In another, a furious Ridge, his authority challenged from within and without. In a third, a manipulative Hope, seeing a golden opportunity to seize control. And at the center of it all, a terrified, newly powerful heiress and a disgraced doctor, both used as instruments in a scheme masterminded by the one person who wasn't Eve. General. The bureaucratic machine groaned to life. Paperwork was printed, a transfer order was signed by the shift commander. Luna was lifted onto a gurney, her wrists and ankles secured with the familiar, brittle plastic flex cuffs. The ride in the windowless prison transport van was a blur of streetlights and motion, each turn bringing her closer to the nexus of the plan. She kept her eyes closed, conserving her energy, playing the frail invalid. The ambulance bay at County General was a cacophony of controlled chaos, just as Larson had predicted. The handoff to the two sheriff's deputies was perfunctory. They were exactly as described, one older, with a weary paunch and the 1,000-yard stare of a man counting the days to his pension, the other, younger, trying to project an authority he didn't yet feel. They wheeled her gurney off the van, the older deputy grumbling about another junkie faking for a fix. They didn't see a threat, they saw an administrative chore. The journey through the sterile, brightly lit corridors was a study in institutional indifference. The keycard access elevator hummed its ascent to the 7th floor. Luna's senses were on a razor's edge, hyper-aware of every detail. The flicker of the fluorescent lights, the distant, tinny sound of a hospital PA system, the smell of antiseptic and floor wax. Then, as the elevator doors slid open on the 7th floor, she heard it, the first, faint, insistent blare of a fire alarm. A moment later, the sharp, acrid scent of burning plastic and wiring hit her nostrils. Hector. He'd come through. Ah, hell. Not a drill, the older deputy sighed, his hand going to his radio. Smoke, thin and gray, began to seep from a vent down the hallway. The controlled chaos instantly escalated into genuine confusion. A voice shouted, "Code Red, West Wing basement. All personnel, check your areas." Nurses and orderlies began moving with purpose, their focus shifting from their duties to the potential emergency. This was the moment. The 90-second window. The deputies hesitated, the gurney stalled in the corridor. The younger one looked towards the source of the smoke, his hand on his belt. The older one tightened his grip on the gurney. Luna chose that exact second to convulse. She didn't just lurch, she threw her entire body into a violent, gagging spasm, rolling off the gurney and onto the linoleum floor with a jarring thud. It was a risky move, but it played directly into their training. They saw a medical crisis, not an escape attempt. "Damn it, she's seizing," the younger deputy yelled, diving to grab her shoulders. As they both bent over her, their world narrowed to the task of controlling a sick, thrashing inmate. Their faces were close, their attention completely on restraining her flailing limbs. Luna, meanwhile, had her hands tucked tight against her body. As the older deputy fumbled for a new set of cuffs, she executed the maneuver Larson had diagrammed for her. She took a sharp, deep breath, expanding her chest, and simultaneously twisted her wrists in opposite directions with a brutal, sudden torque. There was a distinct snap as the plastic seam of the flex cuff gave way. The feeling of her hands coming free was electric. There was no time for triumph. As the younger deputy's eyes widened in shock, she didn't punch or kick. She shoved, putting all her weight into a push that sent the older deputy stumbling back into the younger one, creating a precious second of tangled confusion. She scrambled to her feet, her legs wobbly but functional, and ran. She didn't look back. She followed the smoke, a ghost in a gray jumpsuit, sprinting down the hallway as shouts and alarms erupted behind her. Left at the water fountain, straight past the abandoned dietary cart, right at the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Larson's directions were a map burned into her brain. And there it was, the fire exit, propped open by a simple wooden wedge, a sliver of dark, free night visible beyond. She burst through the door, the cool Los Angeles air hitting her face like a physical blow, and stumbled onto the deserted loading dock. Her eyes scanned the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. Where is it? For a terrifying 3 seconds, she saw nothing but dumpsters and discarded pallets. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible purr, the beige Toyota Camry rolled forward from behind a large industrial waste bin, its passenger door already swinging open. She didn't hesitate. She dove inside, the door slammed shut, and the car pulled away with a smooth, unhurried acceleration that was far more terrifying than a screeching tire ever could be. The ferryman said nothing. He was a silhouette, a cap pulled low over his brow. He drove with an almost preternatural calm, merging into the sparse 4 a.m. traffic as if he were just another commuter starting an early day. Luna sat in the passenger seat, trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash leaving her hollow and shaking. She watched the city slide by, a world she had been severed from for months, now rushing back in a blur of light and motion. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, until they pulled into the lot of a 24-hour self-storage facility, its facade bathed in the harsh glow of orange sodium lights. The ferryman stopped the car, pointed a single, gloved finger towards a specific unit, B-17, and then, without a word, he looked straight ahead, his role complete. Luna got out. The Camry drove away, its taillights disappearing around a corner, leaving her alone in the vast, silent lot. She approached the roll-up door of Unit B-17. Taped to the bottom, just as described, was a single key. Her hands were still shaking so badly she could barely fit it into the lock. She hauled the door up just enough to slide underneath, and it closed behind her with a heavy, final clang. The unit was small, about the size of her former cell, but it contained a different kind of universe. A single, battery-powered lantern sat on a cardboard box, illuminating its contents. The go bag was a high-quality hiking backpack. She unzipped it with frantic fingers. Inside, she found everything Larson had promised: jeans, a plain black t-shirt, a hoodie, socks, and underwear. A wallet containing a California driver's license with her photo but the name Leah Rodriguez, a social security card, and $500 in mixed bills. A prepaid burner phone, already charged. A set of keys with a fob for a nearby parking garage. And, at the very bottom, a single, unmarked envelope. She tore it open. Inside was not a note, but a photograph. It was a recent, telephoto lens shot of her mother, sitting at a cafe, reading a newspaper, looking safe and unaware. On the back, in a precise, typeset font, were 2 words: account settled. Larson was gone from her life as suddenly as he had entered it. The plan, in all its perfect, cold, and ruthless detail, was complete. She was out. She was free. But as she sat there on the cold concrete floor, clutching the photo of her mother, Luna knew with a chilling certainty that this was not an ending. It was merely the end of the prologue. The world outside these walls was a different kind of prison, and her escape from one system had just made her a permanent fugitive in another. The real bold and beautiful, and terrifying, struggle was just beginning.